Good evening, everyone. I'm Julia Fedorova. Welcome to the Sweet as Master Kitchen Talk. As always, I'm asking you to follow us on social media, support this channel, add your likes, comments, and we need and appreciate your support. In my introduction today is very short. Please welcome the Queen of Royal Icing, Kathleen Lange. Your Majesty, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for having me, and thank you to everybody who will be tuning in eventually. It's my pleasure to share my love of cake decorating.
So, let's start from beginning. Tell us when, where, and why little Kathleen decided to be a cake decorator.
Well, so I was raised in San Diego, and my dad was a county road department foreman for a small little mountain, 100 people, and my mother would do a lot of baking and everything. So I was about 3 years old when my interest was piqued with baking because my mother, would like to make pies and cakes and then they bought me an easy bake oven. And because we were such a small community, there was only 30 kids in the entire school, and we were ages first grade through eighth grade, and I was first grade, and we would do craft days and all get together as an actual community and participate in different things. So baking was just a part of it, and I just showed an interest at such a young age. My mother really was one to help promote it, and my dad. And so we lived on the mountain till I was about fourth grade, and it was culture shock when we moved. And so it was more difficult for me to start again in a larger school of 30 kids to 400 children, and 40 children in my grade of fourth grade. And so it was kind of like culture shock in a way. And so I would continue to do crafts, and eventually my mom had me do homeschooling. And so I started doing homeschool because I would tend to get my work done before everyone else in class. And it was a lot of wasted time because the teacher was pulled in so many different ways. So my mother tried to get me into different types of, basically crafts, and continue to spark interest in other areas. She also showed me how to sew when I was 6 years old because she was a seamstress. And so I made shorts and tops and things from the time I was young. So I've always been into crafts. And then she had bought some cake decorating tools and had them available to look at, and books from Wilton. And it was about 1974 when I was in fourth grade. So about 76, she started getting the different books and things. And I would sit there and study the books and just think of how amazing it was that people could do this with icing. And then my mother wanted to take painting classes, so hydrocal, the plaster painting. And so I did that with her as I became a teenager. I did a lot of crewel embroidery, crocheting, toll painting, hydrocal painting. Well, all during the time I was also attending school from home, then we would travel as well. So it just kind of fast forward. And when I was about 15 or 16, the school district was concerned that I was not with other children or other teens of my age, and felt that I needed to show and have an occupation that I could take and use as an adult. And so at that point, I was one of the first students I had all of my academics pretty much completed by the age 16. And all I needed was government and English and 17 electives. And so all of those electives were to be used. They were like, free classes basically. So I was one of the youngest students allowed. to attend an adult school, which was kind of a trade school. And they were letting people do, graduate from high school there. So I went ahead and I attended my academic classes. But during that time, every instructor I had molded me into what I am today. And I still continue using everything that I was taught. But during that time, my mother decided to attend a cake decorating class at the same time. And so that was at that time, it was called Muscatel's, which was kind of like Michael's. And she registered for the class. It was $15 for 6 weeks. And at that time, she couldn't afford to buy all the materials for both of us to do it. So she had some of the supplies for me to actually use. And she sent a friend with me to take the class because she felt we were doing too much together. And so we attended a 6-week class, and it was in San Diego. And it was the first Wilton beginning class. And basically, my instructor, 4 weeks into it, she says, would you be interested in teaching? I see a lot of potential. And I was 15 years old at that time. And I was like, I'm shy. How can I teach?
It's absolutely amazing. Absolutely.
And so her name was Carol Guerin. She was my mentor. She also worked she had come from New York and had moved to San Diego and started teaching Wilton. Her sister was a prominent caterer in the Hamptons, and she actually wanted me to go work for her. And I was like, me? Little mountain girl? I can't go to New York City. And so I ended up just attending her classes, but excuse me, at the last class, she had asked me to become a teacher. So I started the class in January of 1980, and I finished in February or March. It was March of 1980. I had just turned 16, March 3rd. And so from then, she says, there's a teaching seminar coming from Wilton in Chicago. And the 2 people that were teaching it was Noreen Lopez. Well, Noreen Lopez was one of them. And she was very prominent in the Wilton School for teaching Lambeth as well, which was kind of interesting. And then my instructor says, I said, well, how am I going to do this? I only know the beginning. And so she started the advanced class, which again was 6 weeks. And it was 2 hours a week. And I don't think she had enough for that class, or one of them. And so she ended up teaching it at her home with myself and another 2 ladies that we became lifetime friends. Actually, everyone I met at that time they were continued lifetime friends. And anyway, so we completed the class. October of 1980 was a 4-day Wilton seminar, and it was in San Diego. It was one of their, I would say, more in-depth seminar. I was very fortunate to learn the beginning and the advanced and some gum paste during that class. So she took me to the class each time because I just had my driving permit or had just gotten my driver's license, and downtown San Diego was about 30 miles for us. And so we went ahead and I attended the class, and I met 30 different instructors. One, for instance, was Linda Bills that helped do California Cake Camp, and so I met a lot of the San Diego ladies that were involved with California Cake Camp and the California Cake Club, along with San Diego Cake Shows. And so I did the class, and then Carol, being the teacher coordinator she was, put me right into a store. And I started teaching at a place called San Diego Party and Costumes. It was also my first job, working for like a craft party store along with teaching. My first class, Wilton class, was 16 students. And here I am, 16 years old. And I was nervous, and I said to Carol, I said, what if what if I don't know an answer? And she says, just tell them that you're going to come. And, anytime somebody asks you something, say, I will research that. I will talk to somebody and find the answer for you. And so that's what I did. I taught there for 2 years till I was 18. And I had also worked at a bakery during that time. And I continued. I was actually working, teaching, and attending classes at the adult school and taking Lambeth at the same time, because Betty May was also recommended to me by Carol Guerin, and she had a shop in San Diego, and Betty May was a Hall of Fame decorator. So I basically was doing 4 different occupations all within that time. And as I was attending the classes, Carol recommended, she says, take everything you can that pertains to cake or any type of craft that you would use in weddings. And so I attended floral design, fresh flowers, dried, toll painting, which was painting on wood, calligraphy. I also did as well, because that pertained to writing on cakes. And then I took it was a beginning cake decorating class through there as well. And I just noticed the light. Excuse me 1 second. Let me pull the shade down. Our sun is setting. Let's see. That's almost. Hold on. Just a minute. Sorry. We've had rain mostly, so it's kind of weird that the sun is setting now and shining. But anyway, so I went back to, so I was at Foothills Adult School, which was in San Diego, and there was a woman by the name of Patricia Skidmore that was very well known for her catering classes and lunch, brunch, and buffet cake classes, along with cake decorating. And so I attended her classes because, again, I had 17 electives I had to complete by the time I was 18. So I started attending her classes, and her classes always had 30 in them, always. And it was 3 hours, and we would basically go, we would make a whole cake design during that time. She taught figure piping, she taught rice paper, just all different types of designs. And then she did wedding cakes. And then in the lunch, brunch, and buffet was a lot of, like, if you were doing holiday cooking, she would show how to cook a prime rib, how to do mashed potatoes, all of that. So I did cooking along with everything else. And then when we went to the wedding reception class, that was a 3-hour class. She would buy all the supplies, and we would do a themed wedding reception each 3-hour week. And so we would do, I think we did a rainbow theme. We did, all these different themes that would also go with the food and the cakes. And then she found out that I was a Wilton instructor. And so when it came to the cake decorating, she would ask me to show my expertise, which was nothing compared to hers. Anyway, I attended every class as a repeat until I could get, because it was 17-week classes at that time. So each class was at least 17 weeks. And so I was attending a full-time schedule and then still going to Betty May in the evening and working and teaching on the side. So I was quite busy. And then I graduated from Foothills, and I was recommended by my instructors to teach the culinary classes at Foothills at age 18 when I graduated. And because Patricia Skidmore was retiring. So that was kind of my start at teaching at college level, but also trade school level. And I taught there while I continued to teach at the San Diego Party in Costumes. So that was my first 2 years of um, of the decorating. And as I mentioned, Carol had recommended that I attend Betty Newman May's classes. Well, when I went to meet Betty Newman May, I was in awe of the Lambeth style. And
Oh,
Carol says, "You've got to take Lambeth." And I'm like, what the hell is Lambeth? I don't even know. and so she's like, it's a real intricate design. And so Betty had all of her cakes on display. And Betty was not a woman of a lot of words, but she was very talented. And and because she lived only 30 minutes basically from us, I was able to attend her classes. And she did Lambeth as 6-week classes, 2.5 hours each week, with at least 40 hours of homework or more. And so I attended 150 hours total class time with her, not so much to just learn new techniques, but it was to perfect the skill that she was teaching. And she had us complete 8 to 10-inch cakes each time. And she would have us make at least 1,000 flowers or more of little apple blossoms. It didn't matter, toothpick roses. So a lot of my intricate design work after taking the Wilton seminar came from Betty, as far as showing me technique. And mind you, she was going blind at this time. So her work was not as precise because she was considered legally blind. And it took me 4 hours or 4 years to complete the class with her because they were weekly, but she was also ill and in and out of the hospital quite often. And she was the one that introduced me to the ICES convention, International Cake Exploration Society, and to San Diego Cake Club, because a friend of hers had started the San Diego Cake Club. And so I would go as I could. I was still working a lot, so it wasn't, and it was fun work. I mean, it wasn't like it was a lot of work, but it was fun. And so I continued with her until it was about 85, 84, 84. And she would always tell me as I was decorating, there's room for improvement. And
absolutely, it is true.
and I'll tell you, I never thought I was going to get past room for improvement. Anyway, she would she had all her diplomas and everything on the walls, and from different ones that she worked with. But as I came to know her more, she had actually known Wesley Wilton, and she was friends of his, and she actually had done some of the cakes and the books for Wilton. So she had actually not employed by him. She would make that clear. She was friends of Wesley, and that she would definitely help him with some of the books. And so some of her cakes are actually in the encyclopedias for Wilton and the wedding cake books, some of the ones that actually have Lambeth. And so during the time I was studying with her, she would also invite guest instructors for like 1 day or 2 days. So that's where I learned from John McNamara, which he was the figure piping artist, Man in the Window and Farmer's Market, I believe. And he worked in San Diego, was on TV, and would pipe animal characters, all of that. He was very, very good. And then he did some sculpturing. I learned from Eleanor Rylander from South Africa. And she came, they were very good friends. So there was all these different also pastries. I learned Danish pastry and other types of pastries from some of the pastry chefs that came. And so that was all during that period of the Lambeth class. And so at the very end, I also, during that time, I started working at another store called J.C. Penney's, and I was teaching Wilton there as well. And there was competitions with Wilton, and you would have like the amount of students you had or how many classes you taught. And so I actually won quite a few awards with Wilton and being one of the top. Actually, I did J.C. Penney's, Montgomery Ward's, and Muscatel's. And then I later did H&H Craft and Floral, which was also, and we would have up to 6 classes a week, 2 hours a week I would teach. And I did beginning, intermediate, advanced, weddings, some gum paste. I worked in chocolates, all different types of techniques. And then I even helped with a celebrity cake contest to help raise money. All along in my whole career, I've always helped raise money in some sort of organization. And so we did a celebrity cake contest that was 2 San Diego Clippers at that time. They were basketball, and then to Sounder, there was all these different, like 2 radio personalities, 2 news personalities. And so it was pretty fun. I mean, and so I got to meet a lot of people in the different organizations and also with J.C. Penney's. So then fast forward, I basically worked in bakeries again. And so as you can tell from a very young age, it just seemed like that was what I was meant to do, because if I was working at one store, then another door would open and another door, depending on what I wanted to do. And backing up to Betty May, I basically went back and attended some classes here and there, just little classes. And again, she would tell me, you need to enter. And I was not into competing. That was basically not what I was about. What I was about was learning the technique correctly and carrying on that technique. And I always said to myself, would I ever be as good as Betty May? Would I ever be able to teach in other areas like Betty Newman May? Would I ever make it to be a Hall of Fame decorator like Betty May or John McNamara or Eleanor Rylander? And I always thought it wasn't about being popular. It wasn't about being the best. It was about just my own self-satisfaction of decorating. And I'm my own critic, but then I'm also my own competitor, because I try things that have never been done or that was in Lambeth. And so I kept thinking about her telling me room for improvement. And I finally graduated from her class. And at that point, her husband, I guess at the time, she didn't give certificates out to her students. But here, 2 of us had completed her entire course, which was 10 sessions of 6.5 weeks each session. The last 2 sessions were 10 weeks each. And so that's why it was 150 hours of class time. But during that time, was I able to really perfect the technique? No, it was all the homework that I did in between. And so what happened was she became more ill as time went on. And 1994, I went back to one of her classes, and she called me out of the blue and she said, Kathleen, I would like to ask you if you could do my doctor's retirement cake. And at that point, I thought to myself, oh my, I graduated. I didn't have just room for improvement. She was actually asking me to do her doctor's retirement cake by using her recipe, her frosting, and her design. And she wanted a pot of gold in the front that was dimensional, 3D. And this was in 94. And then she wanted an airbrushed rainbow, and that her doctor was her pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And he liked fishing. And so a fisherman on one that was airbrushed and a fish on the other one. And then she had side scroll borders and things like that that were actually she drew on what she wanted and the colors she wanted. And so at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, okay. I got off the phone. I told my mom I graduated because Betty wanted me to do her cake for her doctor. At that point, I delivered the cake, and she was so pleased with it. And I asked her at that point, because out of respect of Lambeth and the techniques, I felt it was always very respectful to talk to somebody or ask them for their permission to carry on the decorating. And so at that point, I said, Betty, would it be possible if I'm able to teach Lambeth method as you have? And she looked at me and she says, Kathleen, I don't know of anyone else better to carry it on. And so at that point, I felt that with her recognition and with her permission, that I could go on and teach. And I told her I was opening a cake and candy supply store. And she asked me where. And at that time, I told her it was in El Cajon, California. And she had been in Lakeside, California. But unbeknownst to me, she actually had a shop in El Cajon previously. And she asked me where the address was that I would be opening. It ended up being her very first shop that she had opened her bakery and cake and candy supply store in. And since then, I have found previous handouts that had my address from the store that she had been in prior. So I feel like it was kind of full circle that I attended her class, but then also was in her same store that I had no idea she had been in before. And so I continued to carry on the decorating. At that point, I was working, and I also, at age 22, had my daughter. So with my husband, I was married, so it was just, it
You
was a bit,
manage everything perfectly.
I did everything, but it was a lot all at once.
I'm
And
sure.
I kept decorating. But you know what? Family has always come first with me, or my health, for instance. And so I had the cake and candy supply store for 3 years, and I opened a bakery as well with a partner. I fell asleep going home one night. And so that's when I decided it was not worth my life or my health to continue on. And at that point, my daughter was 6 and my husband had left. And so I was a single parent. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to really work on everything else. And that's kind of how it worked out. And then there's so much more history since then. But that's basically how I found my niche in cake decorating, was basically taking the classes with Wilton. And I learned techniques from all of them. But then I learned to perfect those techniques and add my own flair. And working in bakery.
As you were taught, you learned and improved.
Yes, most definitely, because when different ones see my cakes, they go, that's a Kathleen Lange cake. I can tell your cakes
Yes.
from everybody else. I think I feel I used a lot of Betty there, because Betty always said, think small, think small. And John McNamara, he'd say, think big, think big. And I'm like, is there any in between? And so also, I chalk it up to learning and perfecting skills at a young age. I didn't have bad habits. I was able to start and to build on my techniques and pressure control from the very beginning. And Wilton helped in that sense to explain decorating at different angles, 45-degree angle, 90-degree angle. And so I was able to take that and use that in Lambeth, which Betty May really didn't do. And so when Betty May taught the class, Wilton was a very structured class, Betty May, in fact, I have some handouts to kind of show. Betty May's handouts were basically drawn handouts and with numbers and everything, and showing what would be done on the cakes and how they would be done. But there was no like real, you want to squeeze until you're at a certain angle, you know, how the shell should look correctly, how it shouldn't be wiggly, how it should be, the tip should be held, she knew, as far as the actual star tips, but as far as the angles, she couldn't explain that part. And so that made it more difficult. So she would show us a puff or something that, for instance, that was used in Lambeth, and I would have to sit there and study her hand on how she moved it, and how she would just basically show us, and then we had to do it. And I would do a puff, and then I would scrape a puff, and then I would do a puff, and then I'd scrape a puff. And so it was a lot of scraping because I was a perfectionist. And
people now cannot imagine just go to class, watch and learn. No phones, no cameras, just with your eyes, you remember, you repeat, you learn on your mistake.
Exactly. And you know, the other thing that I really have to emphasize is the people that I taught or I learned from were they were giving their whole hearts, and they were in person, and they were showing techniques that they had learned from other instructors as well. We all learn, a lot of people say they're self-taught. Okay, self-taught is good, but a lot of people had to learn from a book or seeing something. So we're not self-taught. It's basically, you have seen it somewhere, you get ideas from art, you get ideas from other books. You can self-teach yourself and show yourself other techniques, but until you have an actual instructor that knows how to hold your hand, guide your hand. Like when for instance, I take my students and I have the bag, I put my hand over that bag and I guide their hand the direction it needs to be. I squeeze it with them so that they know. Not having somebody in person it's more expensive, and honestly,
yes,
because you make so many more mistakes. And the other thing is the
and you
interaction.
need lots of time for it.
And the interaction with the other students and the other expertise that you learn from other students as well, from owning businesses and from attending seminars, you learn things from each other. And I have to say, with social media and everything today, everybody's like, why aren't you doing videos? Well, first of all, we didn't have good internet service for a while. And secondly, I was on the road so much teaching and traveling that when I got home, I was wiped out and I was doing family stuff. So I just really have to emphasize that, yes, you can learn, you can be self-taught, but you usually get ideas and you've seen it online. And now TikTok and all these different social media groups and videos. I mean, if you have the foundation, and that's what I call it the most, the foundation. If you have the foundation, then you can build on that foundation and come up with your own designs and your own techniques. And that's what's been fun for me, because I use my techniques I learned in floral design and painting and all of the things. I never took huge, long classes. I did techniques and then I built on those. So I call my house my big cake, because I also use techniques in decorating, and my yard is a big cake. And so we use all those elements. We use texture, we use color. Everything builds on the techniques that we learn and the foundation we start with.
Absolutely agree.
So
How
that,
many students do you have around the world approximately?
what was that? I'm sorry.
How many students do you have around the world approximately?
You know, so I have now been teaching 45 years. And my husband laughs because he says I could be in almost any country and be stranded and call a student. And so, I mean, I had so many different nationalities in San Diego as well, because we were a very eclectic group of, San Diego is kind of like New York in one sense, but we had a lot of military. So we had a lot of people from all different areas, all different walks of life. So from the very beginning, I've met people from, other countries. And so I'd say, when I taught Wilton, they had lost count of how many people I actually taught. They had me down as 10,000 people by I think it was 2010. And since then, I've also demonstrated at IBIE, I've RBA, where you've had large groups. I've done Christian women's clubs. I've done Girl Scouts. I've done, I think, 17 countries I traveled to and 50 cities. So all of those places, I had anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 students, but then I would have demonstrations with 30 to 500, depending on how many, or like also sitting there and demonstrating and meeting people. And when you talk about other countries, I literally was in Birmingham, UK. I had my chef's coat on, and this is in 2012. And I had two ladies walk up to me and say, Kathleen, we follow you. And I said, on Facebook? No, on your website. We're from Dubai. So it's like, I can't even give you a number. It's like my husband, the one day I was talking to him and I says, I don't even know how many cakes I've decorated over these years, because when I'd work at the bakery, we'd do 30 to 50 weddings a weekend. And there were 3 of us decorating, but only 2 of us that were doing elaborate cakes. So we would at least do 10 to 20 each cake or each week. And I did that for several years. And then I've done weddings before I had a bakery, during the time I had a bakery, and now I'm still doing wedding cakes. So it's like thousands of cakes, birthdays. And I have to tell you, and I'm still excited about it, because I love what I do and I love teaching. And a short, quick note, I just had a woman from Puerto Rico come that just finished on Monday with a class from me. She traveled all the way from Puerto Rico, and which was the one day she was on flights for 15 hours. But we met in San Diego 15 years ago. She was a student of mine. And since then, she's lived in Puerto Rico the last 10 years. And she called me out of the blue a month ago, and she goes, Kathleen, can I come and take a class from you again? I'm like, Emily, where are you? And she goes, I'm in Puerto Rico. And we had the best time. And what was really cool was, come to find out, Patricia Skidmore was her instructor too. She took classes in 1980s about the same time I did. She lived in San Diego from 1982, I think it was, till 2002, 3, till about that. So it's such a small world. And like with you were in my class in New York.
Yeah. So the about classes and about competitions, you have amazing experience. So do you remember your first competition?
It was in San Diego.
Of
And
course.
it was 350 cakes were entered. It was a very large one. It was through the San Diego Cake Club, and that's the one that's the one that Betty May says, I want you to enter. And I'm like, I don't want to enter. I don't think I'm good enough. And she's like, you should enter. And she never really recommended how to enter. And she didn't say that you should enter a cake that's maybe original versus one you did in a class. She didn't mention any of that to me. So the first year I entered, it was called the gondola cake. And it was a light green cake that, actually Lambeth did one similar in his book. and it was light green with pink flowers and white decorating. And it had a gondola that was kind of a half sugar egg, and it was kind of it looked like a baby type bassinet or whatever, to me, more so than a gondola. But anyway, I entered that, and then I entered, I did a figure piping one with, I figure piped penguins, and I had them coming down a hill, and I think I entered two. So my gondola cake was up for first place and best of show, and it was knocked down because of being a class project. I had done it because it was a replica of another cake. So that's fine. Okay. So, and then I think I got third place on the other one, the penguin cake. But guess who my judges were? My judges were all Hall of Fame decorators. They were John McNamara, Francis Kuiper, Betty Newman May. It was all the ones, and for some reason they all ended up kind of in California, which is unusual. And so anyway, the next year I was like, okay, I'm going to enter, but I'm going to do an original. I'm not ever going to copy anything else other than, techniques. So I did, So I did a cushion cake. And Betty Newman May was known for heart cushions. She was the only one that ever did make heart cushions. And also with, I believe it was, let's see, Edith Gates. Edith Gates was another woman that taught like Betty Newman May. And I've since then met several people that have known Edith as well. But Betty, she always wanted to make things a little more difficult and a little more intricate. And so she would go to using 3 ones at the end rather than just a 3. Lambeth never went below a 3. She would do 1s. And so when I entered this next cake, I entered a red and white cake. And no one had ever done 2 colors for cushions ever. And I won best of show. And that was the red and white heart cake. I don't know. Can we see? Trying to see the light. You know what?
Next time I just post the photo.
Okay, that sounds good. I forgot the lights were very high, but it is a red and white cake. You can kind of see it.
No, unfortunately not.
No, but anyway, it was the cushions themselves.
Send me the picture. I will post bottom of the video.
Oh, okay. I'll do that. Anyway, so that's kind of what I did. And then as far as showing any other places, I went to the ICIS convention, and she wanted me to take cake. I went to one of the ones that was in Long Beach. It was one of the largest ICIS conventions for the International Cake Exploration. There was over 2,000 people that attended, and it was on the Queen Mary. And that's where I met a lot of like Nick Lodge and all the other decorators. And I never really wanted to show anymore. That wasn't what I was about. What I was about was teaching. And I did most of my show work in bakeries. and so that's what that's all I could do at the time. And because I didn't have the ability to travel, and we didn't have the shows that we have today, or well, that we did have. We don't have those anymore either. But
unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
So my question to you, like business owner and skilled cake decorator, what is the most difficult job, to be the business owner or skilled cake decorator?
I would say business owner, only because you have so many different elements in business as far as keeping up with the different techniques, but also the customers, the clientele. But I did cake and candy supplies, and I did bakery. So I did both. I can honestly say I did not have any bridezillas. I worked with my brides one-on-one, and I never had one that was just out of control. I had motherzillas. Motherzillas were the ones that had arguments with their daughters of what their cakes were going to be. But I would say, as far as that, the business part, I think, is the hardest. And I think that's why you see so many businesses that are not in business for so many years, because, I mean, it's just different times. My
What is
time,
your advice for young business owner in our industry?
the main thing is stay a step ahead of, learn new techniques, you need to be very, a broad range of different techniques. And the reason I say this is because, like, when I learned um, Lambeth versus, everybody's like, well, you'll never use Lambeth in a bakery. What are you thinking? No, you're using those techniques every day with other things that you're doing in the bakery. Those techniques are what taught me to be able to make my own molds and to make everything else. So as far as it's being diversified, being able to work with flowers, being able to do painting, being able to airbrush, being able to do dessert cakes. But first and foremost, the most important thing is to have the best tasting cake. If you don't have the best products, no business that you have, no technique, no sculpture is ever going to um, set you apart. It's going to be enhancing your decorating if you're able to diversify and have the best tasting product. And I think that's the biggest clincher, is the best tasting product.
So, speaking about the techniques you are not using in bakery. So, nowadays, this cake, the old fashioned design, is very fancy stuff. So, enlighten us what is the technique they use and why they shouldn't call it a Lambert technique.
So the Lambeth technique, well, first of all, okay, going back to that, basically what is going around the internet and has been for quite a while is they're calling it vintage. Okay, it's bakery decorating, because basically any bakery you go to has always done shells and has always done ruffles and has always done wedding cakes. Over time, things have evolved and people add their own, their own little flair to it. But for the most part, yeah, basically it's it's basic bakery decorating. And you can't even call it vintage, because basically vintage, so cake decorating has been around since the 1700s or before, and especially even like royal icing. So every technique has just evolved. And it's interesting because some of them are fondant, some are buttercream, some are royal icing. I've seen the techniques totally evolve within 10 years, to where, okay, in the 50s, Lambeth style was very popular because it was a lot of the wedding cakes with the roses and stuff like that. And so people started being more intrigued with Lambeth because he had had his book out. It was published in 1932 or 34, something like that. So, and there's been so many other books out before that, but I think the one that really brought it to the US is Wilton. And Wilton was basically showing basic techniques: shells, roses, rosettes, string work. And he was basically using everything that had already been evolved over time. So I don't even think you can call it vintage, because it's always been one style over another throughout the beginning of time. It's like fondant was used in Britain and in Australia, and they would use marzipan on it, and then they would decorate with royal icing. In Italy, a lot of the things. So I would say, first of all, they better stop calling it Lambeth, because Lambeth, basically, Lambeth is a man, and he wasn't the first that has ever done intricate design work. There's many over the years of time. In fact, I just made a few notes to just mention, like Shelby. There's Percy. There was several others that came before him and some of them didn't even write books until after him even. What set Lambeth aside was that he was an American, but he was also in Britain, and he was in in some sort of military, because they said when he left the military, he actually came to New York and won a competition as well. And so I think what set him aside is first of all, he knew how to market himself. Okay. Second of all, he entered a lot of competitions, and they think that he won 200 golds and silvers. He entered in London. He entered in all of those places. So I think he basically knew how to market himself very well. And then he started a school similar to what Wilton did. And he also probably looked at previous books or previous decorators from other areas as well. I think what also set him aside was that he worked on perfection. It wasn't, if you look through his book, you do not see just shells. You do not see just rosettes, and you do not see just ruffles. You see overpiping. And Lambeth actually was known for his overpiping skills and for precision in that way. And he always did colors on his cakes, sometimes light colors. He never did drastic color. And a lot of the colors he brought was some of his flowers. But when you look at his designs, somewhere on the cake had 5 layers. And that's something that also ICIS, International Cake Show, started emphasizing on when people were competing for like the, I can't even remember the name of different ones that were going for their master sugar artist, world's master sugar artist or something like that. So Lambeth, they started looking at it closer, and it had 5 layers somewhere on the cake. So one layer being a zigzag or a shell or something like that. The second layer being a straight line with the same tip, like say if it's 16, then a 16 straight or scallop. And then it would have a 5-4-3 or a 5-3-2, different types of variation in tip sizes to give a dimension. So Lambeth was all about dimension. It was not about basic borders. It was about the extreme dimension that you could get. And so like when you look through his book, for instance, some have it, some do not have the book, but I think I have 4 of them. But this one is the first one I ever had. It retailed for $50. And my first one actually, Betty May borrowed to take to Africa, and she had to replace it because the binding came apart. I have a leather bound one that's 2nd edition, I believe. First edition is different than all of them. The first edition actually has more patterns and things. But if you look at some of his basic borders, for instance, like some of these borders and some of the practice things, his book is very vague. And I don't know if you have it, Julia, but the book is, okay, so it's very vague. It's hard to understand for a lot of people. But if you look at some of the different techniques, everything had more. And that's what I always tell people. But wait, there's more, because it was never not enough. It was like there was always another embellishment that went on top of it. So basically, the tips that he used were round tips, star tips, and one was called a 174, which to me, I think is the 199, because it looks more like that, where it's a finer groove tip. So when you look at some of the techniques, he would do a shell, but then he'd do a scroll on top of the shell. And then he would overpipe. Well, in order to overpipe, you would have to do the shell, the straight line, but you have to have a groove. And this is one thing I noticed even in his book, he never did that. And so some of them were actually uneven. Now, Betty May was the stickler. She was like, you keep a tooth facing up so that you have a groove to lay in. And I'll kind of show you that a little bit. But basically, vintage is basic cake decorating. And it's bakery decorating that's been around from the beginning of time. And then you have Lambeth, which also saw other techniques by other well-known decorators in Britain and other countries. And when you go back in history for royal icing, Lambeth did mostly royal icing. And the reason being is because it was in Britain, where a lot of times it was fruitcake with marzipan, and then the royal icing was actually placed over the marzipan. So it was the actual icing on the cake, the royal icing. But that being said, it always had a little bit of glycerin added to it to keep it from being hard crack stage. That's evolved, and I have to say, like, royal icing wasn't even really called royal icing until Queen Victoria. And Queen Victoria, her chef was actually British, but then there was also an Italian chef that worked with her or worked with him. And it was fruitcake, but it was frosted with royal icing, so they called it royal icing. And that's going on, is it 180 years since Queen Victoria? 180, I think it is. I forget which year. Yeah, 185 years since her wedding and since the chef had used royal icing. So, and then that being said, Australia did it, but then also I believe Germany started making it a little more popular as well. So, you know, Lambeth was a gentleman. Lambeth was somebody that competed a lot. And Lambeth was all about dimension and extreme. And so that's the difference between Lambeth and today's cakes that they're calling vintage, versus some of them are even calling them Lambeth. I even, when the chef did Kate's wedding cake, when the prince and Kate were married, she said she used Lambeth. And I had so many people come to me and go, there's no Lambeth on that cake. Well, basically it showed lattice work, some of it, but no, there wasn't really any dimension added to it. Lambeth was good about doing, like, he did pressure piping as well. But again, there was a lot of that in previous books that were even, I mean, Christine Flynn in Britain right now, she is really amazing at the history of royal icing and all the British decorators that were even before Lambeth. And so some of that I compiled from her. And then also, what was it? There's so many other decorators that have taken off and done different things. I mean, Eddie Spence is one of the greatest, and he was pressure piping. And what's the difference between English overpiping and Lambeth method versus vintage? Well, pressure piping and English method is more of a 3-layer somewhere on the cake, and all PME type tips that are like number 42, 44, they're finer, smaller than a 199. They're, like size of a 16, but a very fine groove. So things like that, have made, and Eddie started when he was 14. I had the privilege of attending one of his classes and being a friend. And my friend Christina Radu, I consider the one that can take Eddie's. Nobody can ever take somebody's place, but she is mentored by him and so amazing that she can teach his style and his techniques. And the same with Christina. So I recommend that people, instead of trying to be the one doing vintage and Lambeth, is kind of carry on the history of the actual decorators that have brought these techniques to us. And that's been my main goal as an instructor. Is I always mention Betty May. I always mention Lambeth. I've had students that have taken classes that wouldn't even mention that they took a class from me. It's like, I have always been happy to tell people that I had such amazing instructors in person that showed me techniques that I may not have known otherwise. And so to keep those people alive is my goal, and has been from the very beginning. And I will, if I don't know the answer, I love to go to Christina and ask her, or Christine, or some of the ones that are around, because there's so many incredible decorators out there. And I'm just one that enjoyed what I did. I started teaching it, and going back to how I started teaching with the Lambeth, I showed one of my cakes, and my goal was to change the technique to where it was more modernized, because that's what people have been trying to do with the vintage look. They add the cloth ribbons and things like that, and they make them look more feminine. Well, my goal was to make the Lambeth style more feminine. So when I envision something, it usually comes the way I want it. And so I envision lace. Well, when I went to the San Diego Cake Club, my father, I started doing and becoming more to where I wanted to show Lambeth in 2006. And that was when my dad was in the hospital and he was not going to make it. And I was in La Jolla, and I went to the San Diego Cake Club again. And I saw everybody I knew, and they were all like, Kathleen, where have you been? I'm like, working, teaching, bakery, all of that. And Linda Bills, she says, her and Ev Scott, which started the cake club, says, Kathleen, you need to bring back Lambeth. Look at all of this, because Betty May had done everything there, and had students that would enter, and there was none of that anymore. So basically, they said, bring Lambeth back. And I went back, because what I call it, everything that was there was called lick and stick to me. They were using the Cricut, and they were using cut out cookie, just basically like if you had cookie cutters, and then pasting it on, not even adding dimension to it. And I'm like, these are the ugliest cakes I've ever seen. and I have to say, when I did fondant, I hated fondant, because Betty May taught us how to make it from scratch, and my hands were so friggin' cold, I couldn't roll it out. And she recommended that we roll it by hand. We could not use rolling pins. We had to use our hand, and we had to roll our fondant, old-fashioned way. And I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm ever going to do fondant. And then Welton came out with fondant. And I'm like, really? This is so stupid. I don't want to do this. And so then we had to teach fondant. Well, so then in 2006, I told my dad, I said, I'm going to bring Lambeth back. So I went back to the RBA, which it was called at that time before IBIE. And because as a bakery, I used to go there, and I started going to those in 96, even before that. So anyway, I went to the RBA, and lo and behold, that's when all these, I think it was 96. Yeah, this is when Food Network, a lot of the people were more popular too. And guess who I ran into? Carrie Vincent.
Oh.
And I was like, and she was sitting in a little corner autographing her book. And I was like, okay, who is she? Because I wasn't even really watching. I was not watching all these shows. I had no clue. And so then I saw, and I was like, oh, she's from Australia. I have heard of her. And Keegan Gerard and some different ones were there from the Food Network. Bronwyn Weber. And so I introduced myself, and I told Carrie I did Lambeth, and she knew Betty Newman May. Because when I started bringing up people's names from prior that I knew and who I had attended, like Eleanor Rylander from South Africa, people then took me seriously, because they're like, oh, she's not just Joe Blow off the block. She actually knows these people. Marcia Wimbeckler, Roland Wimbeckler, all of these people I knew from different like demonstrations, Nick Lodge, but then the ones that I attended was Betty Newman May the most. And so everybody really did respect her. And so I'm sitting there, and this is how I came up with my bow. So Carrie was sitting there, and she had, they were almost like those dollar store mats that you can get that were like from China. The ivory mat that has gold on it, and they use them for placemats. Well, she used to use it to texture fondant and do borders. But there was one sitting there, and when I looked at it, I was like, oh, that looks like a bow to me. And so I came up with my Victorian bow, and that's where this came about. So in 2007, I did this cake, and nobody had ever combined fondant with Lambeth. And so that's when I made my bow, and I put a little cushion in the middle of it that's a heart. And that cake I took to, I think it was 2007, I showed it at the California Cake Camp. And in 2009, I decided I was going to go to the ICIS convention again so I could go to the one in San Diego. So 2010, I took this cake. I redid a little bit of it and added to it from the time I showed it in California Cake Camp. And it was a huge hit. And Ruth Rickey from Oklahoma, she came up to me and she says, Kathleen, would you teach a class? And I'm like, of course, and so we talked back and forth, and she goes, could you come to Oklahoma? Well, I'd be honored. And so Ruth Rickey, I have to say, is the one that really promoted me as far as my class. And she goes, what should we call it? And I said, a boot camp. And she goes, well, let's do Boot Camp 101, 201. So that's how the name evolved for my boot camps. And I went there. I flew, stayed with Ruth and her husband, and I taught 4 days during an ice storm in Oklahoma City in a January. And I had 16 people from all over, from Austin, Texas, just everywhere, Tennessee, came to that class. And Ruth posted a lot of pictures. And, I give credit where credit's due. And she definitely was the one that opened the doors more so again for me in ICIS convention. And then from there, I was invited several other places. So when you take a technique and different techniques, and then you build on them, mine was more to make it feminine and more of a wedding cake that was more Victorian. I love Victorian things. So basically adding that element of the Victorian bow and Lambeth at the same time was, that's how I got started, more so with the boot camps. And then I tell people after that is, learn the technique and then take that technique, perfect it, but then add your own skills to it. So I have a number of students that I love throughout the US and in Italy that I would call my equal now, and that have pretty much perfected it. I'd say they have to perfect it a little bit more to where it's more precise, but they have the skill, and it's just using that. And it's fun to see a student do that, because that's my reward, that they're going to do well. But when I went and attended a class with Eddie Spence, that's when I met Christina Radu, Claudia Prate, Manuela. All of them I consider amazing. Dora Luca, doing the royal icing. They all attended my classes, not Christina. We worked together. We were together all the time. But we have a love of royal icing. And I have to say my greatest accomplishment was attending the class with Eddie Spence. I want to combine Eddie and Betty. And he goes, you're actually kind of like a little protege, because you started about the same age and had the same love. And the same thing that I always said was keep piping alive is one of his sayings as well. And so there were there was 10 or 12 of us that attended. Ruth Ricky went with me, and Christina, and several of them. But you know, the biggest compliment to me was that some of my students were his students as well. And so it was like, it was just so neat that they're carrying on all the techniques that different ones have shown. But after I did that class, I came up with this cake, which I also did for 2017. And this has some English overpiping on it, but pressure pipe. And it has like a bee, a hummingbird, and things like that that are in the little plaques. Everything's edible, no molds. And that's the other thing, is if you learn the techniques like I did, you learn to do your own style, and you learn to work with what you have. You don't have to buy molds. You don't have to buy all that. And Eddie had the same thing he would tell students. If you have a tip, a bag, and royal icing, you can do anything. And that's that's basically what I have said to all of my students, because we didn't have the ability to run to the store and be able to just pick up an item or order on Amazon. We couldn't do that. And so, and even today, now that I live in North Idaho, we don't have, we have Walmart. You know, we don't have, I think Michael's is 50 miles from here. Also, you know, the different ones. I have a ton of cake supplies just from over the years, but everything I go back to is the tip, the bag, the royal icing, because you don't have to have a lot of
You don't need more, just time and your wish to do something.
Exactly. So that's basically the other thing. So that's the change that I did to Lambeth, was doing it on fondant. A lot of people did not use fondant, they used royal icing. And during the class with Betty May, it was royal icing. We had to actually frost the cakes or dummies with royal icing. So I tried to do things that were different. And so like this one, for instance, the heart one, this one's in a lot of different magazines. But I was very honored that Jackie Curtis with More Than Cake, that has the royal mix, used that cake for her packaging. And I endorse her royal icing because I could travel with it and it didn't break down. So there's a lot of things, but then also was this a different style, adding more Victorian, but also more feminine style to the design work. So I try to do things that are not the common Lambeth, because I'm Kathleen Lange. I want that little style, and hearts are part of me. I love hearts, and I've always worked them into my designs as well.
So, speaking about products, what products do you recommend for beginners to start the journey for and don't be broke?
So I would say the basic, especially for, it's so hard though, because Wilton they don't have as many decorating tips and things that they used to. I would say start with decorating tips, decorating bags, angled spatulas. Okay, these are great. Palette spatula, you know, the little palette knife. Okay. Brushes are your friend. Basically tips. As far as tips go, I love PME. Wilton, if you can get a hold of any of the Wilton tips that are older, they're great because they have numbers that, like 401 is a ruffle tip I love. Now they only have like a 402. I don't even know. I'm considered a lifetime instructor with Wilton. I got their, I was inducted into their Hall of Fame, but then also into their Imperial Club, which is considered a lifetime instructor, but I don't even know if they honor us anymore as far as that goes. But at the time, I used to get quite a substantial discount when I worked for Wilton. So I have every pan they ever had. I have doubles and triplets of pans. All of my products were the ones that were made in Korea. and they were very good quality tips. The newer tips we found, like when I taught in Hong Kong, a lot of the tips actually had seams in them, especially the Wilton tips. And a lot of them were produced in China. And they have a little seam in them that when you start to do a round tip, it would curl on you. So you almost have to take a little Dremel tool and try to clean that seam up. Atico is a good brand. I mean, their tips are a little larger, but PME is the top-notch quality, and they are out of, they're in Chicago now as well. So a lot of my tips are PME round tips. The one thing I like about them is they come in half sizes. So you have a number 1, but then you have a 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and so on. Those are really good. The main thing is, good decorating bags. I usually use parchment. And the reason I use parchment paper is it doesn't break your icing down as quickly as a plastic bag. If you're doing buttercreams, experiment with the different buttercreams. I'm working on a cookbook, I promise. I've had so many people ask for it. And I'm also working on a book. And I will be doing more videos because I feel that, and after the Puerto Rican student of mine, she was terrible to me. She's like, you need to do this. She goes, we need to keep your techniques. She says, there's so much knowledge that you have. And I have all the paperwork from Edith Gates, from Betty May. I have from John McNamara, all of these instructors, plus my other instructors. So just trying to keep the basic tips, the basic bags. You can use clear disposable bags for some things. They're not reusable, they're disposable. They also break down icing, but then the other thing is trying to get decorating. You want to work with frostings that work well and that are true and tried for the different techniques as well. And I work with buttercream just as much as I work with royal icing. Buttercreams, I love Italian buttercream, and I'll also use kind of a mock Italian buttercream, but I don't use egg whites. I use meringue powder or an egg white powder. I don't use egg whites in it. I just use the water with the egg or the powder to make or replicate it. Because, egg whites sometimes are harder to find or harder to keep on hand versus the powders. And so when I'm doing the different types of buttercreams, I do that. Also sweet butter, high quality ingredients. Sweet butter, non-salted, works the best, especially for buttercreams because it doesn't melt in your hand as quickly. Also add just a little bit of shortening, but a high ratio shortening. One that actually, high ratio is when the liquids and everything emulsify more so into the shortening. So it's more of a it binds together. So high ratio shortenings are very, very good. They have icing shortening, and then they have like Sweet Texas more all around shortening.
Yeah, Sweetex has both.
Those definitely work well. The icing shortening will actually make a lighter icing. Crisco
No.
doesn't work very well at all. And a lot of people, that's your problem. Use a high quality sugar. C&H, Domino's, never use beet sugar. Beet sugar, you'll look on the back and it actually has more of a granule texture. So high quality sugar. England, Britain, all of that area, Italy, usually they get an icing sugar that has no cornstarch in it. And cornstarch affects your icing. But
Yes.
cornstarch also keeps it from becoming rock hard. And so when Jackie with More Than Cake asked me about the royal icing mix, I said, we need something that has more albumin in it, less additives than a meringue powder, because we need something strong. And the only product I had seen on the market that worked was Color Flow Mix, because it was stronger, because it had mostly egg white. The problem with the Color Flow Mix that Wilton had, that one worked the best in humidity, even the royal icing, but was because it had titanium dioxide, and that is not, it's a whitener, but I said it'd be better if we didn't have it. And then if you make icings from scratch and you're using egg white, a lot of times it has citric acid in it. And the citric acid will affect your colors. So just get, for the new students, get good quality shortenings, get good quality meringue powder. Like I said, the Royal Mix is awesome. And the reason I use it the most is because it dries faster, it doesn't have the titanium dioxide, and it doesn't have citric acid. So you can color it and it looks good. What's nice is you can flavor it. And she has flavors that are, they're powder flavors. So if you do macaroons or anything like that, you can't usually flavor them because it would break down the egg white. With this, her powders, it takes like a 1/16 of a teaspoon, and I can actually taste good royal icing versus not. And so that works good, but also it's the type that's pretty much no fail. And you can make a cup of icing or 2 cups or a pound, depending on what you need, but you can also freeze it, where some you cannot freeze and pull out. So that's a good thing to remember. As far as the tips, like I said, PME, the spatulas, and turntable, good turntable. Tilting is really good for Lambeth, but they're basic supplies. They're not, you don't have to go out and spend tons of money on supplies. And I think that's probably why nobody ever wants me to be a spokesperson, because it's not like you have to go buy a bunch of tools. It's like, oh, just use a few tips. The other thing I have to mention is we always learn to cut our bags. So for writing, a lot of times we would cut our parchment paper to where we could do our tips. Leaf tip, you can't replace a parchment leaf tip, because I can cut from a baby tip to the largest leaf tip I want. So there's those. The other thing is find as many vintage cake supplies as possible, because I have to tell you, all my older stuff will outdo any of the newer stuff. I mean, like the flower formers, all the different things, the vintage books, those are a great reference. You know, people take computer for granted and social media. And I have to say, if we have no electricity, we have no computer. and we have no way of ordering supplies. So it's always good to have a backup and not rely on Amazon or certain stores for getting products last minute. Always be prepared, and then have the best recipes that you can come up with, and tried and true recipes. Now on my website, I have a lot of different frosting recipes. I have blogs that have a lot of information on them. And I've used a lot of those recipes. Like right now, I even sell a candy that I have had the recipe over 40 years. And it's one of the best brittles I've ever had. And eventually I'll be putting that, I may, if I don't get the book part done, I'll sell some separately until I get that. But, you know, find good recipes, good equipment, and the vintage books. All the older Wilton books gave so many ideas. Even a company called Made of Scandinavia used to be, I think it was in Minnesota. I have some of their old books. People would just share their cakes in it. And the internet's great for ideas, Pinterest, stuff like that. But, you know, all the other basics, there's so many good tools out there that actually are on eBay or garage sales. So, and I know I've talked a lot. I want to show just a couple tips.
Yes, please.
And then, and maybe later on we can do something again.
So I have an idea. Show us something simple, and people should repeat at home and send a picture of your creation at home. Kathleen taught you right now how to do it, and you repeat it, and you have video. It's better than all days just
Right,
by memory. So send us pictures how you practice at home. It shouldn't be 40 hours, but
right.
it should be something. And we continue, and you will improve the your skills and learn from the best of the best in our industry.
And I am happy to do that. And I think if you look over here, I put a couple of the cakes that I have, and those are on the website as well. And then the other thing is the board. This
And
is a
I
good.
add the link to your website in your blog, bottom of the video.
Uh
Use
huh.
recipes, tell uh, we appreciate your feedback. If
Yeah,
you like the recipes, let us know. If you like
definitely.
these tutorials, let us know. We appreciate your feedback, your support, your love. So let's learn.
Yes, definitely. This is some of the techniques that I show um, when I first start the class. So it basically shows like the basic shell, rosettes, scallops. So if I have a student that attends a class, I start them with the basics because everything to do with Lambeth is basic. And then I also have this I came up with for the students. It's to practice in 1 inch sizes and half-inch sizes because I find that that really helps with students to have more of a visual than I had when I was learning. So I'm going to show you just a couple things, just a quick hint, and I'm going to move the camera down. I'm going to use a tip number 16, and this is one hint that I've only known a few people that know this. Here, I don't want to drop you. Okay. Sorry for the shadows. It's getting dark. The star tip, which is the number 16, if you look at this, there's different, there's the teeth on it. And the teeth, you want to make sure you have one tooth facing up at all times. So have one V facing up. There we go. So that you have one groove in the top of the icing. So that's the key, and that's how Betty May taught us. So if you have one tooth facing up at all times, and your 45-degree angle, so when you do a shell, you squeeze, let it fan, ease off the pressure, and touch down. Squeeze, let it fan, ease off the pressure, and touch down. That you will have one groove continuously in the top of the icing. Also, Lambeth, his biggest thing was zigzags. So again, touching, lightly touch the surface, squeeze, and go in a 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock motion and touching the board slightly. And this way you're getting a nice even zigzag. And the pressure is everything. So pressure control, that's what you want to practice. The other thing is the key to Lambeth is lightly touching the surface. And like if I was going to drag this tip, drag, keeping it nice and even pressure. There shouldn't be any holes, no little bumps. And then when you go to do the zigzag on top, you squeeze, lightly touch, and pull. The other reason you want it to lightly touch is because when you go to overpipe, see how there's no little gaps or holes underneath the straight line? That is so that Lambeth is precise and even. And so like when I'll do a couple more little things. So when I do a zigzag scallop, I lightly touch the surface. And if you notice, I'm doing the 2-inch spaces because most of cake decorating in Lambeth had like 2 to 3-inch spaces, and everything was divided in half, quarters, eighths, depending on the style and the technique he's doing. So make sure your tip is always clean. Lightly touch, and I'm going to squeeze and do scallop zigzag, lightly touching and doing a 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock motion so that my zigzag is always straight. So if you see that, I don't have it at an angle. I have it straight with it so that I can get a nice even zigzag, wider, and then ease off the pressure when you come upward so that you get a nice scallop. I would then lightly touch and drag. So these are some little techniques that you can learn and practice, keeping that tooth facing up. Okay, So then you have a nice even zigzag. So if I see there's no little humps or hollows in it. And then I will show you basic piping, overpiping. And this is by taking a tip number 3. Now, one thing I see a lot of is people don't realize when you start to squeeze a line or anything like that, you want to barely squeeze and then touch down so that there's no bump when you start squeezing, because a lot of times you'll get a little bump. Ease off the pressure and touch down. The whole key is to keep even pressure. So when I'm overpiping, a lot of times you go around the whole entire cake, then I will squeeze, lightly touch, lift up, and if you notice, this is going to lay right into the groove of the icing. And I'm going to ease off the pressure, touch down, lift up, and ease off the pressure when I'm about 3/4 of the way and touch down. So then I have a nice even line. The whole key is to keep everything nice and even, so you don't have any humps or hollows. Then Lambeth always went down a size of tip. So that was a number 3. I'm doing a number 2. So if you see, I lightly squeeze, lift up, and let it drop. Keeping a nice even pressure, ease it off, touch down. So when I do this on the next layer, I'm going to lightly touch, lift up, let it drop. And I'm kind of coming to the back side of it. But if you notice, it's a little smaller tip by the way I showed you on the board. Lift up and let it drop, ease off your pressure, and touch down, and stop. And now I'm going to show you one other tip, which is the tip number 1. So you can see how it has the difference. But now you can see how even that is. You shouldn't have any humps or hollows. And a lot of times you've worked all the way around the cake, so it's by that time it has a little time to dry because you don't always work wet on wet. Here's the number 1. I lightly squeeze, lift up, let it drop. Ease off your pressure and touch down. So you have your nice even lines. So then I would complete this by adding one more line. Squeeze, lift up, let it drop. Ease off your pressure when you get about 3/4 of the way so that you can inch it along to the point. And then lift up and let it drop. Ease off the pressure when you're about 3/4 of the way. And stop squeezing. So then that way you have 5 layers on your cake. Can you see that? So 16 being one layer, the zigzag, 16 straight is the second layer. And then the next layers are 3, 2, 1. So you have 5 layers on your cake. So that is how you start and then what you should practice. Shells, zigzags, straight lines, that's all has to do with pressure control. Does it bring back memories, Julia?
Yes, it does.
I also have to emphasize, when you look in the book for Lambeth, he has not a lot of, like I said, a lot of his items, he just explains a number 3. He doesn't say a 1. I believe he cut a lot of his tips for the smaller ones. But when he came to piping, a lot of his piping was not below a 3. And so I think it was because he was a man. And then he had a lot of flowers on his cakes. And I think those flowers took away from the imperfections because your eye goes to the flower and not to the imperfection of the icing. So those are some of the basic techniques that I would start any beginner on, working with pressure control and how to control the icing, and writing. Writing is key for cakes because if you have bad writing, it really takes away from your entire cake. But I was going to show you one other thing too, because when I tell people I do cake and I also show other techniques, I've turned that into a non-edible art. And when I was showing you this board with the different decorating, this is paintable dap. It's very similar to what they used to use for decorating fake cakes. And so it was always quite expensive. It was a product that came from Magic Line, I think. Well, when I was doing home repairs, I was using paintable DAP that for filling in caulking. It's like a caulking. But I, in 1980s, had to make displays because the cakes were being eaten by rodents in the craft stores. The mice would get in the craft stores and start eating frosting. So I would start using this DAP to keep them from eating it. And so I've turned it into art, and I did wall borders with it, but I'll just show you one last thing. I'm gonna move for a second. All the techniques that I teach in pressure piping, I've used for art as well. And this is paintable DAP, and it's colored with acrylics, and it is acrylic. So I can do it on any type of surface, and like the eagle on driftwood. And then all the flowers that I make in cake decorating, this is a work in progress. This is going to be a sunflower. I haven't painted it yet. But these are all techniques that I teach with the cake decorating that I've used to turn into art. Here's my Highland cow, and if you look, he has a little tongue sticking out. And he's going to have a butterfly up here. So there's a lot of, you don't have to do just cake. All the techniques, this one's my husband's. This is Bigfoot as a fisherman. So it kind of shows you what can be done like you would do with icing, but with paintable DAP.
It's absolutely adorable.
So I have a lot of people that want me to teach that class next.
Yes, do it.
Yeah. So anyway, but with that being said, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity, Julia, to explain a little bit about myself and about my journey. And I do want to say one thing. I did remarry, and my husband is Tim, and you have met him. And
Yes, I had a list of questions, and like we spoke before the live, we decided to continue our conversation, and I would like to keep these questions for our next conversation
that'd be awesome.
because I want to know about, yes, we met many times, and I know our husbands, they are the bigger our supporters.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I want to know about your daughter, about your family, and for people who just saw us like cake decorators and teachers and judges, we have families, we have friends, we have husbands. So we love to speak about them, and most of them knew each other, and I think they should have some club, because
Yes.
when we are busy they should do something. So people, next time we continue our education in Royal Icing, and we will speak about our families, friends,
awesome.
and many more topics ahead. So thank you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much for your time, for your dedication to the art, and I hope we will have time to continue education of people about Lambert and other technique as well.
Well, and
So
I still
don't
teach all
forget
the
to
classes.
add your pictures bar of the video when you practice these simple techniques.
Exactly. And you can find out from your viewers what they're interested in. And if there's anything in the future I could help you with, that's perfectly fine. And as far as the pictures as well, I have pictures on the website. It's a teaching website, and so it has a lot of information and a lot of blogs. And I'm always open to, I know I have a lot of people asking me to do video classes. And so that we now have high-speed internet. We're coming up in the world. It's pretty bad when you had a husband that's a video engineer and you don't have any videos out. Other than I do have to say, I do have 2 videos, and they are online. on my shopping cart. This one's the
So
101.
on your website, they can order it, right?
They can. And then I
Okay.
also have my classes.
Bottom of the video, I'm posting all information about your social media, about your website, and about your blog.
That's perfect.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
I love you. Miss you.
Love you. Bye bye.
Definitely. You take
Thank
care.
you so
Bye-bye.
much to everyone. See you
Thank
soon.
you. Bye-bye.